It's a typical dark, cold October night. Adults come home from work, parents tuck their kids into bed, teenage sweethearts snuggle up to watch a scary movie. People going about their regular, everyday lives, unaware of what could be happening all around them behind closed doors. Elsewhere in their neighbourhood, strange, dark things are happening. Rituals, black magic, satanic worship, people messing with dangerous forces far older and far greater than anything they could comprehend.
What have you done to him, you maniac?
Much like folk horror, the term occult is incredibly broad. Movies about the occult can encompass a multitude of stories, themes, and ideas. And perhaps that's why some of the greatest and most shocking movies in cinema fall under this umbrella.
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
Unlike folk horror, occult movies can be set anywhere, from New York apartment blocks
This is no dream. This is really happening.
to 16th century convents. And unlike slasher or zombie movies, occult movies aren't restricted to one type of monster. Victims in occult movies can fall prey to witches, demons,
You know what she did, your canting daughter?
or even what must surely be one of the most formidable villains in all of cinema, the devil himself.
Hail Satan!
And perhaps this is why occult movies throughout the history of the horror genre have repeatedly proven themselves to be some of the scariest, the most shocking, and most controversial in cinema history. This series will be looking at the way in which the portrayal of occultism and occult practices have changed and evolved in horror cinema.
I have what is perhaps the finest library in the world on witchcraft and the black arts.
We'll go back to the very origins of the medium to see the way in which Satanism and occultism were used as cautionary morality tales. We'll then look at the way in which the occult was linked to counterculture during the satanic panic of the 60s and 70s. And how that progressed to people embracing and subverting the image of the witch or the outsider in the 80s and 90s.
I bind you, Nancy, from doing harm. Harm against other people and harm against yourself. Wait.
Finally, we'll be looking at the recent trend of occult movies from the last decade in horror and figuring out exactly why in this modern, enlightened, secular world, we're still terrified by the idea of satanic worship, demonic entities, and the existence of pure evil. Join me as we light some candles, prepare a pentagram, and begin our journey through the evolution of the occult.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
Hail Satan and welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike and as ever I am your host. It's good to be back. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across several weeks. Now, you're in luck because actually, if you are listening for the first time, we're on the first episode of a brand new series, but there are also 4 other seasons that you can go back and listen to. What a treat for you. But this week, we are beginning our brand new series, as the intro suggested, on the evolution of the occult in cinema. Now, what is the occult in cinema? Well, that's what we're about to explore this week. But loosely speaking, they're going to be movies that deal with Satanism, witchcraft, and the dark arts. As you can imagine, there are some absolute gems to cover over the next 20 or so weeks. I cannot fucking wait. So, I'm going to be introducing my guest very shortly. But first of all, I just want to make a couple of very quick announcements. Now, if you follow us on social media or if you listen to a recent announcement announcement episode that I put out, you will know that this month, in fact next week, terrifyingly, we are going to be doing our first ever live episode of the Evolution of Horror. And I can think of no better film to discuss for our first ever live episode than probably one of the most infamous, one of the most loved, one of the most iconic horror movies ever made, William Friedkin's The Exorcist. We are, of course, planning on covering this for the Occult series this year, so what better time to do a live episode? If you are in London or within easy reach of London, then please do come along. Some tickets are still available. It's going to be on Halloween Eve. That's Wednesday the 30th of October in the Courtyard Theatre in Shoreditch. We're going to be screening The Exorcist, the director's cut of The Exorcist, on a big screen, and then we're going to be recording a live episode afterwards. I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Jamie Graham from Total Film and Prevenge and Borderlands producer Jen Handorf. The two of them will be joining me to discuss The Exorcist in depth on stage. If you want to be there and if you want to be part of that live discussion, simply go to evolutionofhorror.com/live and follow the link to grab your tickets. Cannot wait. I hope to see as many of you there as possible. Okay, but that's enough announcements. It's time to get into our brand new series. Now, as ever, with every series of this podcast, episode 1 is a non-spoilery kind of overview of the subgenre. What the hell do we mean by occult movies? It's a pretty broad term, and we're going to do our best to get to grips with what that means this week. Now, later on in this episode, you're going to hear a little snippet from a conversation I had with a really fascinating guy called David Huckvale. David Huckvale is a writer, film scholar, researcher, presenter, a whole bunch of other stuff, and he wrote a book called Movie Magick, The Occult in Film. So, of course, I had a fascinating discussion with him about all things occultism. You'll hear a little snippet of that later on in this episode, and I will play you the full interview on Patreon. So if you're a member of Patreon, you can hear that whole interview as of now. But it wouldn't be an introductory episode of the series without this guest, one of my very favourite people to have, and I love to pick his encyclopedic brain, and his brain really is encyclopedic. In fact, he runs the Encyclopedia of Fantastic Film and Television. He has a vast knowledge of horror films, and he's a perfect person to introduce us all to the world of the occult. Back once again for the 4th time on this podcast, it is my great pleasure to welcome Kevin Lyons. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, thank you. And may I say right at the outset, hail Satan and all his perverted minions.
Exactly. That's exactly how I was going to start as well. Perfect.
Well, it seems appropriate for the moment, doesn't it?
Exactly. It does, doesn't it? So here we are, this series talking about the occult. It feels like quite a broad term, doesn't it? You know, I think, when we talked about zombies, that's very, very specific. Everyone kind of knows what they're getting into with a zombie film. With an occult film, that could mean, I think, a lot of different things.
It's a very slippery term.
It is.
And I think possibly for the first time in this whole sort of history of evolution of horror, you're going to find a lot of crossover with things you've done before.
Absolutely.
I think, certainly folk horror.
Horror, even ghost stories.
Ghost stories have an element of the occult. If we go back to those pre-Romero zombie films, it's the occult that are being raised by voodoo.
Absolutely. It's kind of mopping up previous seasons.
It is, isn't it?
Exactly.
This is the kind of the connecting tissue that holds it all together. The only one I couldn't think of anything for, and I'm sure some clever person on Facebook will pop up and tell us, was an occult slasher. There must be a couple.
There must be.
And I can't think off the top of my head. But I wasn't involved in the slasher season, so I can just distance myself from that one. That's not my problem.
I can't think. There must be something.
There must be some.
I mean, there's definitely some weird stuff going on with Jason and his mum. He's got a kind of shrine and candles lit.
He's kind of been distraught. When he found he's a zombie
he's got a decapitated head on a plinth.
Almost ritual-like, isn't it? Exactly. And indeed, some of the killings in those films become almost ritual in the way they do them. So
exactly.
So maybe that's it. That'll do.
There you go. That'll do.
Occult slashers.
So it crosses over into everything, doesn't it?
Everything we've done, yeah.
But if we were going to boil it down to a definition, I mean, how would you describe occult, what that word means, and what we mean when we talk about occult movies, do you think?
Well, I suppose we also look at the original meaning of the word occult, which comes from the Latin word occultus.
Yes.
And I never thought I'd be using Latin when I woke up this morning. It's not really my style, but there you go. Which means hidden or secret or concealed. And really what the occult was originally, there wasn't any sort of supernatural or paranormal elements to it. It just meant people looking for hidden knowledge or secret knowledge. And in some ways, science was, for a very long time, the occult. And you had things like alchemy, which sort of tried to set itself up as a science, but obviously wasn't. And even today, you will find the word occult still used in scientific terms.
Yes.
In astronomy, you've got something called occultation, which is when, like the moon passes in front of something or the sun passes. It means hidden. The moon has hidden it, so it's occultation. You've got in medical circles, you've got phrases like occult blood and occult fracture. These are things where there are symptoms, but you can't see them with the naked eye. You have to go away and do blood tests, you have to do chemical tests or whatever, because they're hidden.
Right.
So the word is still in use in scientific circles. It's just over the years, it became more associated with demonic practices, with the supernatural, with ritual, with cult. And so it has changed quite a lot over time.
It is, isn't it? And that's really fascinating, the idea that it's everything hidden or secret.
Yeah.
And does that science, like you said, even had connotations of occult? And does it basically fundamentally mean then anything that's kind of not mainstream? So you look at mainstream religions, for example, like Christianity, and I always think of occult being the other. The other. Something
and
like
I think science would have been seen by Christian practitioners as something quite scary and we shouldn't go there. There are some things man should never know. Yes. And that was, I think, where the whole sort of, it being a frightening, demonic, satanic thing came from, because of the religious element to it. I don't think when the word was first coined, it actually had those connotations at all. Yes. But I think, the fact that people were looking for hidden knowledge that the mainstream were scared of. Yes. And that still happens today. I think, there's a lot of people out there doing a very advanced science it was Arthur C. Clarke, wasn't it, that once said that, any advanced science will look like witchcraft, or is it the other way around? Which will look like science. And, that's very true, that, if you take even our simplest science and take it back 100 years, people would look at it and try and burn us at the stake. If we showed them a podcast from 100 years ago, they'd just think we were, Satan's minions. How have you done this? Have you recorded this voice? And so, it changes over time. And, what's occult now wasn't occult 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years, and certainly won't be in 10 years' time. It's a very slippery subject, the occult.
That's why it's very fascinating, actually, to look at the evolution of it and what occult means at different eras and what scares us about it at different times.
And I think, so for the purpose of what we're doing here, the occult has now taken on that meaning of being something satanic, something to do with ritual, something to do with alternative lifestyles, alternative religions. And again, an alternative lifestyle could once upon a time have been seen as something much more sinister. Absolutely. I think, we'll talk about this in depth a little bit later on, but, there's the rise of Wicca. Yes. And witchcraft is now seen as much more of an alternative lifestyle. Exactly. Whereas once upon a time, it got you burned at the stake.
Exactly.
And that hopefully doesn't happen anymore.
No, exactly. And I think that's so true. It suddenly can mean something a lot more positive these days.
Yes,
the kind of counterculture element. There's that documentary from earlier this year, Hail Satan, where I actually had on the podcast the head of the Satanic Temple. Yeah. And of course, it's nothing to do with actually worshipping Satan. No. It's essentially just means they've got slightly more progressive liberal views than the average evangelical Christian American right-winger. I think
the idea of sort of sacrificing goats and putting policemen in wicker men and stuff like that, I think that's really good for fiction and films. I think if you actually meet people who are into the occult, if you meet people who practice witchcraft or even Satanism, they're not scary people at all. They've just got a different religious viewpoint to other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can I ask you as well, personally, have you ever been a kind of a spiritual person, a religious person, anything like that? Does any of that stuff, do you believe in any of it?
No, sadly. I do sometimes look at people with beliefs and think, I wish I could be like you. I wish I could believe in something. But I remember as a kid being packed off to Sunday school, as a lot of us were back then, and being chucked out because I kept asking too many questions. And I think the final straw for me was the guy who was running it. I can't remember if he was a vicar or a priest. I was very young, but whatever he was, I asked so many questions. He eventually just sighed and said, "Look, Kevin, God moves in mysterious ways." And I thought, no, that's not an answer. That's not an answer. And ever since then, I've been sort of, I don't know. I think I'd like to believe in something, but I just can't. I'm a science man. I like things I can see and touch, and within reason, see, touch, and feel and hear.
Totally. And I do. I wonder whether that affects how scary you find certain films on this list as well. I mean, I was raised in a very kind of weirdly balanced up household where my mum was Catholic, my dad was atheist,
right?
And so
that's a good mix.
It was a good mix, actually. I think it was quite nice. But my mum was very anti me. You know, she was kind of quite cool about me seeing horror films as a kid. It didn't care about me watching slashers and all those kind of things because she thought they were all stupid anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas she was like, you're not watching The Exorcist, though, and you're not watching Rosemary's Baby, and you're not watching The Omen and those kind of movies. You know?
I had a friend years ago at university who was very Christian, and she came round to the flat one day to do some coursework, and I'd got my big pile of videotapes. I mean, that's how long ago it was, videotapes, for God's sake. Big pile of videotapes. And she stepped into the room and looked at them and said, no, and backed out of the room. She said, can you get rid of that? And I was, get rid of what? And I'd got Demons and Demons 2, the Lamberto Bava films, and she wouldn't come into the room until I moved those and took them out of the room because of her very strong belief that...
Wow.
You know, and I kept trying to explain to her, honestly, if you saw these films, I mean, really, you would not be frightened by them, I can assure you.
I love that.
Know?
And so much of horror is about its reputation, isn't
Yes,
it
it is.
You know, when you look at the video nasties and all of those kind of... And I think there is something, especially when it comes to The Exorcist, that there is this feeling from a lot of people that there's something evil within the actual celluloid itself. You know?
And you heard that quite a lot at the time.
Yes.
You know, you'd hear sort of, you know, particularly in America, the evangelicals were saying this film will possess you.
Yes.
No, mate, it's a film. It's a story. You know, and I know you believe it's real. I get that, and I respect that. But honestly, you're not going to be damaged by watching this film.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I always think it a little strange that people sort of say, "Oh, you can't watch this because it's, you know, it's detrimental to your mental health, it's detrimental to our beliefs and all the rest." I think, well, your beliefs have been around for thousands of years. If one film is going to undermine them, you maybe want to have a look at your beliefs because they're not as solid as you think they are.
Exactly.
Just go in with an open mind and watch it. Interesting, I was, while doing the research for this, I found an article which was in a Catholic newsletter from America, where a guy was actually saying, and this guy is a Catholic practitioner himself, was saying, guys, I think we've got the devils wrong. I think we need to look at it again and stop obsessing about the nudity and the sex and start looking at what Ken Russell was actually saying.
Right.
And I thought, fair play to you.
That's
well
really
done. That's
interesting.
exactly how you should approach these films. Go in, let them challenge your beliefs.
Yes.
And then sort of pit your beliefs against them and say, no, but.
Yeah.
And then that way we can have a discourse about it.
Totally.
Otherwise, it's just sort of, you know, dismissing it out of hand. And,
nothing should be dismissed out of hand like that. And I think the irony is, you know, The Exorcist in some ways is one of the most pure kind of God is good, the devil is bad movies. The priests come in and save the day.
The priest who is losing his faith regains it enough in time to save this innocent child.
Yeah.
How much more of a Christian message can that possibly be?
Exactly,
you know?
exactly.
And one of the many things I love about The Exorcist is that there is a little wiggle room as to whether she's really possessed or she's just ill. I love that sort of, you know, is she really? I mean, all the supernatural elements we're seeing, are they actually just sort of, you know, manifestations of this guy's guilt and all the rest of it?
And we all know that becoming a teenager is a bit of a gross body horror as it is, you know, that's the thing.
It was a long time ago for me, to be fair, but I do remember it being quite scary. I never had levitating beds and revolving heads.
Maybe
although
not that extreme.
I think if you've spoken to my parents, they'd have said, yeah, pretty close, to be fair. But there you go. But I mean, you know, it's. I think, you know, I can still be frightened by The Exorcist. I'm still terrified by The Exorcist, even though I don't believe a word of it.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't believe
it's just a
any of it.
well-told story.
It's a well-told story, and it has like a lot of really good occult stories. It's good versus evil.
Yes.
And I think that's what we all like. Even if we don't have the religious beliefs, we like to think we're good.
I agree. And I do think it is a bit more fundamentally simple in that regard, these movies. You know, we talked about folk horror.
Yeah.
And this idea that with folk horror, it's much more murky. You kind of like, it's people, it's believers that are the ones to worry about in folk horror.
That's right.
And actually, in some ways, that makes them date a bit better, I think, in this day and age than some of these old God versus the devil movies.
Oh, absolutely. Because 9 times out of 10, you know, God won. I think it took 3 films before God won in the Omen series, that's an exception, I think. But most of the time, you know, I think Rosemary's Baby. Sorry, these are spoilers if you haven't seen the film. We should have mentioned
Minor
that.
spoilers, exactly. Yeah.
So.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at something like Witchfinder General and you think, this is much murkier ground we're on here with this.
Absolutely, because even the good guys in that are pretty horrible.
Yeah,
they're pretty nasty people.
Exactly.
Yeah, there is no good and evil in films like that.
So let's go back briefly to sort of pre-cinema. I mean, as this idea of occultism always kind of, you know, does it go all the way back to sort of ancient literature and that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly scholars have traced occult stories back to at least the Elizabethan era.
Right.
And I'd say even before that, I think some biblical stories.
Yes,
I think, you know, there's a lot of the occult in the Bible. Of course there is, you know.
There's some Old Testament stuff that's pretty nasty
Oh,
as well,
absolutely.
Isn't it?
Terrifying. If you film some of that today, I think, you know, you wouldn't get anything less than an 18 certificate with some heavy cuts, I would imagine. But yeah, I mean, it really sort of came into its own in the Elizabethan era, and there were these things knocking about called the shilling shockers. Not an easy thing to say. Shilling shockers.
Shilling shockers.
You all sound drunk when you say shilling shockers. No matter how sober you are. But these were hugely popular little chapbooks that were sold on the cheap with these sort of really sort of grisly tales of terror. And they were sort of sold as kind of cautionary tales. Behave yourself or the devil will get you.
Right, yeah.
They were very much morality tales. And that's where I think, the beginnings perhaps of the occult becoming this thing about the devil rather than sort of mainstream science that we didn't understand at the time.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one of the most famous pieces of literature that I still think of is Faust when it comes to this kind of thing.
Indeed,
right? And that's Christopher Marlowe, right?
Christopher Marlowe. He wrote the play. It was a play.
Yes, that's right.
The tragical history of the life and death of Dr. Faustus, which
right.
is even more of a mouthful than the name of my website, really, isn't it? But there you go. I'm glad I didn't actually say that this time. But yeah, I'm saving it for this. And that was based on the legend of Faust, which came from German legends. And it's a sort of classic tale of a guy selling his soul to the devil.
Yes.
And in fact, the devil in this is Mephistopheles, who... kind of a different thing, but I think we all knew who he meant. I think, the censors at the time would have said you can't use Satan, but Mephistopheles, you can put that in, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think it was a coded thing. We all know what he means by that.
Yeah.
And then later we got Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and his version of it, Faust, which became the really famous one. That was the novel. That was the one that was adapted into film many, many, many times. And it's a key text in the development of occult, really, because it does lay down that blueprint.
Yes.
He's an innocent man fallen on hard times who's so desperate that the devil can tempt him.
Yes.
And, and all the rest of it. It's all there. Everything
it's
we
all
need,
there.
It's been used so many times.
It's very much a morality tale,
of course
isn't it?
It
is kind of like this was what he did is bad, basically, isn't it?
If you're tempted by the devil, this is what will happen to you. And that's the message of it.
Yes.
And like so many horror films, we like to think we're terribly transgressive being horror fans, but actually if you look at most horror films, they're actually the same story. Behave yourself or die.
Absolutely,
that's
they are.
Exactly what they are.
Again, going back to the slashers, they're very much that, aren't
Have
they?
sex and die.
Yeah, misbehave, you will be punished.
Yeah, if you use drugs, you're doomed. That sort of thing. Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, we go forward a couple of hundred years to one of our favourites, M.R. James. And how many of his stories are about people, dabbling in something they shouldn't and then being punished for it?
Again, a lot of his characters were these people who were looking for hidden truth, hidden knowledge.
Yeah.
And he wasn't the only one. Arthur Conan Doyle, H.G. Wells, all around that same sort of time. They were all sort of dabbling with this idea that there were hidden truths out there in the universe waiting for us to come along and discover them. And quite often we weren't ready to have that knowledge. H.P. Lovecraft is the greatest one of this, of course. Isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, his characters were always seeking some kind of truth from something and paying the price when this, hideous tentacled monster from beyond came and consumed them.
Yes.
So again, they were very cautionary tales.
They were. So was it the idea that back then, you kind of looking for some of these answers was something you shouldn't be doing?
Yeah. I think the stories are a little bit reactionary in that respect. It's like, in subsequent decades, we would encourage people to go and look and learn and find things. These were very much, this is the order.
Yes.
This is even H.G. Wells, who was very much a sort of, much more socially progressive and politically progressive. Even he, I think he found it difficult to wander off that path, like a lot of people of his generation would have done.
Yeah.
That this is what the church says we should do. This is right. This is wrong. These are the morals. Don't go wandering off. We don't need to know that stuff.
Yeah.
When Darwin came along and said, actually, we weren't created by God. We're monkeys.
Yeah.
That really
didn't go down well, did it?
No, he wasn't a popular chap at the time. It had to be said, and that was very much part of that. So we don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
We don't need to know that.
Scientists were kind of heretics, weren't they? Basically,
Absolutely.
Galileo, who thought that the world went round the sun and all of that kind of thing.
100 years before, they would have been burned at the stake for things like that. They were very much the occult practitioners of their time. Darwin was actually looking at something that no one had seen before. It was hidden for all those years, decades, centuries.
And I suppose even Christopher Marlowe was somewhat of a kind of controversial figure, wasn't he? In some of his plays and everything. And I guess it's really interesting. So some of these plays and stories, as long as they kind of take the right perspective, I suppose. That if you behave well, you won't.
That's right.
You'll succeed.
Yeah, and if you get too inquisitive,
yes,
if you go go looking for things that you shouldn't be looking for, you will be punished for it. You know, which is really quite a sort of, you know, reactionary sort of stance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of odd, you know, and we kind of expect that, I guess, because of the time in which they were written. I mean, James, of course, was a theologian, so he would have come from that background. So for him, it was don't mess in things that were not meant to mess in, you know, and that kind of thing.
Again, it's very interesting though, because he was very much an academic, a scholar, wasn't he? And you think he'd be the opposite in some ways, but I suppose these things also, they make for really good stories, don't they? That's
absolutely. And there's always been that dichotomy at the heart of the occult, I think, that, you know, people are sort of academics, but at the same time don't want to go down that route. And, you know, they want to stick to what they know best. And, you know, thankfully things are very different these days. But back then, I think it was very much sort of, I think there was a very much a feeling in sort of Victorian Edwardian times that we'd reached the peak of our knowledge, that we knew everything there was to know.
That's so
and,
funny,
you know,
isn't it?
God had handed down all this knowledge and that was that, you know. And then it's like,
nowhere to go from here.
Nowhere to go from here. And
and here we are.
And here we are, yes.
Oh my God. And let me ask you, I think one of the most kind of notable sort of figures in the history of the cult must be Aleister Crowley, right? Tell me a little bit about who was Aleister Crowley.
Well, Aleister Crowley, he was, I was thinking about this. I was writing out this huge biography to hand over here. And to be perfectly honest, we haven't got the time for that.
Sadly, we don't. No.
He's such a complex and fascinating character.
Yes.
But he was this guy who, I mean, he was a writer, he was a mountaineer, he was an alleged spy, and above all, he was an occultist. Amazing. You know, he grew up in, strangely enough, a very strict religious family. But he started to take an interest, possibly because of that, in other belief systems quite an early age. And he dabbled in many occult groups while he was at university and in his younger years, including the slightly well-known, I think, Golden Dawn, which was one of the big occult groups of the time. Yeah. And he sort of tried out various, you know, occult practices before he finally settled on something called Thelema, which was a belief system that he developed himself. Based on an Egyptian legend. He claimed to have been handed the Book of the Laws by this sort of Egyptian deity while on his travels. And like I said, we don't really have time to go into too much about him, which is really fun. But there are plenty of really good books about him, which I'd highly recommend because he's a fascinating character. And there's also the Aleister Crowley Society, which I think you can find online under the name Lash Tal. Right. And they've done a huge amount of really good work trying to keep his work alive. He wasn't always a pleasant man. He would have argued that he wasn't. He had this reputation. The press hailed him as the wickedest man in the world.
I was going to say, he must have had a bad reputation, right? He must have been quite a controversial figure.
I think so. The press really sort of went to town on that whole wickedest man in the world, and the great beast and all the rest of it. But I think Crowley himself, would have actually said, none of that is true. It's all nonsense. What I'm doing is actually good. Yes. I'm working for the good here. Yes. It's because his vision of the good didn't match the vision of mainstream society. So therefore he was pilloried for it. And I think, you know, he did have some very odd views. I mean, some of his scholars and followers will tell you that he was a misogynist and a racist. Others will tell you, no, not a bit of it. He wasn't like that at all. Right, yeah. I think sometimes with Crowley, he actually went out of his way to sort of play up to his image. Yes. And I think he liked to play pranks on people.
That's interesting. And there's an element of this that we'll get into with cinema. I think there's this idea of, like, there's a lot of showmanship maybe to occultism.
Oh, yeah,
there's a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors,
I suppose. Absolutely. You've got to have your cape and your rituals and all the rest of it. And I think Crowley absolutely loved that part of it. And I think he just loved pranking mainstream society.
And, you know, there is, and we're going to get into this a lot, I'm sure, especially when we get into the 60s, but this idea of, you know, being an occultist also is linked to just being an outsider socially. Yes. And, you know, there was he was apparently a kind of recreational drug user and a bisexual.
Yeah, so he was an outsider anyway. Yeah. So I think, you know, I have this feeling of all the things I've read about him over the years that really he was already an outsider, so he thought, oh, sod it, I'll be an outsider and I'll really go for it. Yes. And I'll sort of play up to that. Yeah. You know, so there was an element of that. But I don't for 1 minute doubt that he believed what he was doing. I really do think he believed, you know, the whole Thelema philosophy is very, very richly developed. It's very convoluted. Yes. There's a lot to it. Yes. It does actually feel like a religious belief rather than just sort of made up hippy-dippy nonsense. It does actually feel like a proper... So he'd obviously studied it a great deal, and he really, really meant what he said. But I think there was a kind of playful side to him as well, where I think I don't think anybody ever knew the real Aleister Crowley, because I think he showed a different face to whoever was around at the time, just because that was part of his game, and he liked to do that,
And he had a reputation as well. I mean, the press called him a Satanist, but I guess he wasn't, right? I mean, I don't know anything about the Stellama, but I guess that's the other thing about occultism, right? It's not a blanket term for one particular belief, right?
No, not at all. He was actually sort of trying to raise Egyptian deities. Horus, I think, was, if I remember right, was his main one, and so I mean, he wasn't worshipping Satan as we recognise it.
No.
But the church at the time would have seen it as that, because he was dabbling in these practices which look like Satanism, and that he was trying to raise up these deities which, sort of Christian belief wouldn't accept were real. So therefore they must be demonic, and therefore it must be evil, and so on. But no, to call him a Satanist is actually probably a complete misnomer, because I'm not aware of him ever having worshipped Satan at all.
No, it's so funny, isn't it? And
It's
that's
really
probably
odd.
so much the case with so many quote unquote Satanists from throughout history in the press and everything.
Well, I think one of the groups I was looking at, I was going to talk about and then discarded them, but we mentioned, now you've mentioned this, was the Process Church.
Oh right, yeah.
Which actually has its roots in Scientology and was mentioned in several big studies of Satanism. But I can find no evidence that they've worshipped Satan at all. They believed that there were four gods, that there was Jesus, and there was, I can't remember the fourth one, but two of them were Lucifer and Satan.
Oh, right.
But they always argued that they were the enemy
Yes.
of Jesus. So it's like they weren't Satanists, but they were always lumped in with Satan, because I think people didn't understand them. People didn't know what they were.
Do you have to have a belief in something to be into the occult, or can you be an atheist and be an occultist?
Oh, I think so. I'm an atheist, and I'm very into. It's a little bit like all Fortean things, the phrase Fortean, like that from James Fort, the weird things. I love reading about them. I love watching films about them. I don't really believe them, to be honest. And I don't feel like I'm missing anything by not believing in them.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I think you could look at things like, I mean, with Crowley, when he was looking at the Egyptian gods.
Yes.
I mean, I'm fascinated by Egyptian mythology.
Yes.
That's fantastic, but it doesn't mean I'm going to go out and start worshipping Horus tomorrow, or Anubis, or any of that sort of stuff. I just have an interest in it. I think some people do take it further and want to start, turning it into a religion and sort of worshipping these gods, and that's fine. That's up to them. It's not for me, and I don't feel like I'm missing anything. I can still follow the stories and enjoy the stories and all the rest of it. Yeah,
exactly. And it's the same with Wicca, and I suppose paganism as well. And this idea of how much of it has to be kind of supernatural versus just it's a way of life. I suppose
it's a way of life, isn't it? I mean, I don't know an awful lot about Wicca, but the bits that I do know is it. They're not worshipping Satan. It's like a sort of an earth nature cult, and that's to me seems far more natural than any sort of invisible super deity ruling over us. Because I can see a tree and I can see the sky, and to me they are marvelous, wonderful.
Marvel at that.
Absolutely, they're wonderful things, and you sometimes you do just in a hot summer day you're sitting in the park, you do just marvel at the nature's wonders of nature.
Yes,
and that to me makes a lot more sense. So I can kind of see that would appeal more, perhaps, I think. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Early cinema, I mean, I think this is very interesting, because I would say some of the kind of earliest horror in cinema is kind of occult horror in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Georges Méliès, for example.
Méliès, yeah.
Because all of his films kind of dabble in that, don't they?
Well, they always featured Mephistopheles.
Yes.
Which again wasn't. And I think there were a couple of films where he called him the devil or Satan, but mostly it was Mephistopheles. But again, we knew who he meant.
Yes.
It was this guy with the horns and the red skin. Well, you couldn't see the red skin in his black and white films, but he tinted a lot of the films, and he would have red skin, he'd have the cape and all the rest of it. So we kind of knew who he meant.
Absolutely.
And there was, I mean, he wasn't just Méliès. There was another guy called Segundo Chamon, who was working in France at the time, was doing very much the same thing. Over here, we had our very own George Albert Smith down in Brighton, who was making these, sort of trick films, they called them at the time.
That's it. They are essentially kind of magic tricks, right? Aren't they?
They are. It was when Méliès realised that you could stop the camera, move everybody out the way, start it again, it looks like they vanish. And that's what it was. It was stage magic tricks captured on film. And the occult, of course, played right into the hands of that, because it was all about mysterious, magical things, wasn't it?
That's it.
And so we had a lot of that. And in fact, Faust was
right. Yeah,
it's insane how popular Faust was in British cinema. I mean, I think it's something like 17 films in the silent era in Britain alone.
That's amazing.
Including, and this is one I cannot get my head around, a version of the opera in the silent era.
That's a silent film.
I think they were playing a record, I think, at the time, trying to sync it up to what was going on the screen. But just the idea of filming an opera in the silent era just fascinates me. But
I think that's how I'd rather watch opera, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of opera.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Dario Argento's opera. Yeah, I'll take that any day of the week. Other opera. No thanks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And again, it adds to it's interesting that Faust obviously is such a popular text.
Yeah.
And there's something about it, and it does have a certain amount of showmanship.
Yes, it does.
Has its cake and eats it, I suppose, these kind of things, because they have this very kind of moral viewpoint, but also you can see magic tricks and the devil, and you can see all this horrific stuff, can't you?
And of course, again, it comes back to that morality tale.
Yeah.
You know, look at the naughty man and what he's done, and look what happens to him.
Yes.
You know, and so people like that. I think they still like that now. I think we still like. I know we like to present we've moved on a little bit, but I think we still like to see the bad guy get it in the end, you know. We like to see the good guy win, you know.
Yes. Do you think, people talk about films like, for example, George Méliès's The Manor of the Devil, I think it's called. It's got a few titles like that, hasn't it? House of the Devil.
Yeah.
Would you call that a horror film? Is that the first horror film?
I think that one of the problems we have with the definition of a horror film is that it changes over time.
Yes.
That what was scary in 1899
is
absolutely laughable now.
Yes.
And we think we're oh so sophisticated now. I can promise you in 50 years' time, people will be laughing at us. They'll be laughing at our beliefs and our films and all the rest of it. They'll think we're absolutely hilarious. We have not reached the peak of anything. I can assure you of that.
That's true,
I think, those films were definitely, I think they were made. Some of them were made for laughs.
Yes.
You know, a little bit like the Ghost film. We talked about this. You know, they try to treat it a little bit jokily.
Right, kind of farcical in
That's
the early
right.
cinema, yeah.
But I think people were still scared by them because they were seeing things they hadn't seen before. People didn't disappear into thin air. And, now we just look at it and think, oh, we stopped the camera and someone stepped out of the way. They didn't know that.
Well, I do find that fascinating, the idea that I think, you could argue horror is the original genre in some ways because, look at people watching that train pulling into the station and jumping out of their skin, allegedly, right? You could say that the idea of film was something that was frightening when it first appeared.
Of course it was. And, it's like... It was about magic.
Yes.
It was about magic. It was an occult experience for people because they were going into these darkened rooms and the devil would appear in front of them. And then he would make someone disappear in a puff of smoke.
Yeah.
Or their heads would fall off.
Yeah.
And this was just like, now we look at them and we think, oh, aren't they quaint? Aren't they lovely? All the rest of it. Back then, that must have been terrifying.
You sit in this dark room and you see a photograph move or come to life, even just something as simple as that.
Just having people waving at you from a screen. It's like, it's just terrifying. So, things change over time. And we can see that, later on still, horror films from the 1930s and 40s.
Yes.
We love them, but do they frighten us?
No, exactly.
Not really. I mean, I absolutely adore Hammer films. Very rarely am I frightened by a Hammer film.
Yeah.
And I think in 50 years' time, we'll look back at the films that scare us now and we go, oh, really?
Yeah.
You were scared of that, Grandad? Really? What's the matter with you?
I know,
that kind of thing.
True.
So it's a moving feast, is horror.
Yes.
It changes every decade or so. Things become less scary and some things become more scary.
Totally,
But
it's very
the short
true.
answer is yes, they're horror films.
I think they are.
I think so.
And especially if you just want to talk about the introduction of these kind of conventions, an old Gothic house, a bat, a devil, a horned
supernatural,
demon.
a
big cauldron, and they have all those different kind of
course.
visual elements that come into play in Universal and everything beyond.
Absolutely. I mean, they were laying down the visual and narrative language for the horror film in those early experiments.
Yes.
And I can heartily recommend, if people haven't gone back and watched these films by these early pioneers, please do so, because I think you look at them now, and if you've been following this series, as you should be from the beginning, and you've learned a lot about the horror film and its development, go back and look at those films, and you'll say, now I can see where the slasher film came from.
Totally.
I can see where the ghost film came from.
Yeah.
It's all there. They did it all there in the early years.
They did, and so well with some of them as well. I'm really excited at some point to come on to films like Caligari and wonderful, some of those early movies. And we are going to be talking about in a couple of weeks Haxan, and which feels like one of the a key early text when it comes to occultism.
Hugely important in the development of occult in the cinema, but actually for the cinema itself. So, a 1922 film.
Yes.
Absolutely fascinating. And one of the nice things about it is directed by a guy called Benjamin Christensen.
Yes.
Who set out to make a serious film about the devil, which was really sort of You know, they had done scary films before, but this was a serious, to the point where it's half documentary.
Yes.
The first 10, 15 minutes or so is a lecture.
It's fascinating the way the form itself changes as the film goes on. Yeah.
You get this lecture which sets you up with everything you need to know.
Yeah.
And then you start to visualise some of the things that he's been talking about. So you get these wonderful little sort of vignettes that run throughout the film. You keep cutting back to the lectures, and we look at the art, history of art and the occult in art and so on. But one of the really nice things about it now, and it's very unexpected from a film in 1922, I think a lot of people will look at it and think, oh yeah, it's just going to be, some witchfinders on the rampage. Yeah. It's very sympathetic to witches. Very sympathetic. I think it's one of the first examples we see of somebody saying, actually, witches weren't these monsters.
Maybe the witchfinders were the monsters.
The witchfinders were the monsters.
Yes.
These women were just actually really, really clever, really bright women who understood things that you thickos didn't, so you burn them at the stake for it.
It's very interesting, and it's also quite funny at points though as well, isn't it, Haxon?
Oh, it,
kind of there's a section involving a kind of love spell, and
right,
and it has got those kind of farcical elements as well. It's actually a really fun, entertaining movie to watch.
Oh, it is. I mean, and the devil, who's played by Christensen himself, is absolutely brilliant. I mean, he's really scary. His horrible mottled skin and the sort of the horns and all the rest of it. He's horrible and slimy, but yes, like you say, it's also very, very funny. It's very clever. It's very witty. And you can see that it set the stage for other films much later. I mean, I think you can see echoes of it in Witchfinder General.
Definitely.
I think you can see echoes of it in The Devils.
Yeah.
And, even the Blair Witch Project, the guys who made it named their production company Haxon Films.
Exactly.
Because it's retained that power ever since.
That idea of a documentary about a witch.
Exactly. How much of this is real, how much of it isn't,
It's fascinating, and I love, I think that's, again, when you tell something, the average film goer, oh, it's a 1922 silent movie that is also a lecture, there is something about it that makes it sound like it could be quite dry, but it's the opposite.
Not at all. You will learn a lot from it,
and
you'll also have a really good time with it, and it also has these important points to make, Again, we think in 1922, again, we like to think we're so progressive and enlightened now, but this was a film that was actually a plea for tolerance. It was warning about the dangers of intolerance. This was 1922, so it's a bit of an eye-opener, I think, and it's well worth tracking down a really good print of it. There's some really shoddy ones out there which I would avoid. Try and get yourself a good print of it and watch it, and I promise you'll have a fantastic time with this film.
It's fantastic. How was the film? Was the film in any way controversial for its time?
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, the fact that it was being sympathetic to witches, I think that rattled a few cages. These were women that were beyond the pale for a lot of people.
Right.
And I think the fact that it was saying, actually, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not hurting you. They're actually trying to help people. I mean, the love spell thing is really funny, but she's trying to help out. She's trying to be helpful in this. She's not harming anybody at all. And, I think it did cause a bit of a stir at the time, simply because it was asking people, can we be a bit more tolerant to these people? And they were saying, absolutely not. No, we can't burn them, stick them in duck them in a river, all the rest of it. And it's like that was still very prevalent back then, that thinking. So this film was very much ahead of its time.
And what about going into the 30s? I suppose kind of in some ways the big first boom of the horror genre, where you've got universal monsters and that kind of thing. How did Occult kind of play into that? I mean, it doesn't seem like there was as much. They weren't as interested in that kind of side of things as they were in vampires and werewolves.
It wasn't really as noticeable. I mean, you had things like White Zombie, which had the sort of voodoo stuff in it, and they had a few voodoo films knocking around.
The Black Cat. I mean, does
the
that
Black
kind of
Cat,
have a bit of that to
it? Does. That would be. I'm trying to think if Universal ever went that far with any of their other films into the occult, and I can't think of anything. I think that's probably the only time in that sort of classic monsters run that they did. I think that's the only time they ever did it. We had to really wait until the 1940s. We did get a spell of films where the devil turned up and he was quite a suave, sophisticated sort of, not at all scary kind of character. He was just there as a tempter.
Yes.
And really, I suppose the next really big one would have been The Seventh Victim.
Yes.
Drink it, Jacqueline. There's nothing else for you to do. They say you've got to die.
fascinating film, isn't it?
Incredible film. A Val
very
Lewton
odd.
production. I mean, again, if you haven't seen this film, please go out and watch it. I don't know whether you're talking about it.
We will be talking about it alongside Night of the Demon, in fact.
Yes,
it's actually quite annoyingly difficult to track down a copy of The Seventh Victim. I've discovered I had to get some sort of European copy of it.
There was a box set many years ago of all the Val Lewton films, which I think has been long out of print. And one of the discs, I think I Walked with a Zombie doesn't work, or he's got disc rotters. Yeah, it's kind of hard to find. But honestly, if you get a chance to see it before you talk about it, please, people, go and have a look at it, because it is a great, great film. And you'll watch it, and you will come away from it at the end thinking, I still love Rosemary's Baby,
yes,
but it's not as original as I thought it was. They did this, 2 decades before.
They did.
It's a really gripping film about a woman in an apartment building who sort of falls in with a group of Satanists who are actually very urbane, very charming. They're not at all scary. They're not at all nasty.
Yes, it feels like one of the earliest or most famous examples of bringing that very much into the modern day.
That's
all
right.
These ideas.
Yes.
It's like you say, setting in a New York apartment block. It feels very of the time.
Of the time. It's set in the 1940s. I mean, it looked like a period piece now, but at the time it was set in the then modern day. And I think that again was probably the first time we'd seen that. It's something identifiably modern.
And it's got that Val Lewton way of kind of not on the face of it even appearing through the bulk of it as a horror, or it's kind of this got this sort of human drama element at the heart of it.
I think what Val Lewton did, I mean, we talk about Val Lewton, but obviously there were writers and directors involved as well. He was a producer. We mustn't forget that. But I think what the Lewton films were doing was really quite clever. That they were making films. They were making mainstream films. They were making mainstream dramas that anybody could go and enjoy. Mm-hmm. And then when you were enjoying this mainstream drama, he'd suddenly sort of pull the rug from under you, and he'd do it very slowly.
Yes.
It was very sort of, it wasn't, nothing in the Lewton film sort of jumps up in your face and screams boo at you.
No.
But you watch something like The Seventh Victim and you think, that was great. Then on the way home you think, hang on a minute. And suddenly it gets to you. And that's what I love about those Lewton films.
Yes.
Sometimes it can take years before the penny drops. You think, oh shit, that's what they were doing in that film. It's really, really clever films.
It's very creepy, very bleak. It's a very bleak film.
Very bleak film.
I loved it, and then, of course, I mean, Night of the Demon feels like one of the most famous examples of sort of an early occult movie. Fantastic film, right?
Oh, God, it's one of my absolute favourite films of all time. In fact, I've watched it twice this year, actually. And I will probably get in another one before Christmas. It's one of those films I can never, ever tire of. I am a huge fan of M.R. James, but I'm not such a fan who will sit there and say, oh no, they've ruined the story because they changed it all. It's like, they changed it. They took the basic elements of casting the runes and they threw away the rest, and they made something incredible out of it. And it really is a remarkable film.
And again, speaking of Val Lewton, you've got obviously Jacques Tourneur directing this, who is the collaborator of Val Lewton. Of course,
absolutely. And of course, talking of Aleister Crowley, the main demonic character in there, it's very much Aleister Crowley. I mean, that's he's got that kind of slightly urbane, slightly game-playing sort of feel to him, the way he conjures up a storm out of nowhere just because he can, And it does feel like the writers were looking one eye on Crowley and his legend,
I would say,
while they were writing the script for this.
He's also, despite being the villain, he's kind of the most fun and charismatic character.
He's very likeable.
Yes,
he's very likeable.
He is.
He's much more likeable actually than the hero.
Yes,
Dane Randrews, who's actually a bit of a sort of stick in the mud, isn't he?
He's a bit miserable, isn't he?
He's like, I said earlier, I'm a science guy and I like, but he takes it to ludicrous extremes that even when supernatural things are happening to him, he's no, absolutely not. Doesn't, no, can't possibly be happening. Yes. And, he's a little bit, whereas, so the sorcerer guy, he's much more fun. He's much more affable. I'd rather spend time with him, frankly, than with the scientists in the film.
And I think you're right, that Crowley connection. I think, you could argue that he's coded as he could be gay. I think, this character, there's something quite camp about him and his relationship with his mother.
And all the rest of it. All the stereotypes.
Exactly. But it's just kind of, it's just subtle enough, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we probably see it more now than people would have seen it back then, I think. Now it's, we look at it, we think, oh, I know what they're saying. But back then, if they did know what they were saying, they were like, oh, no, they'd recoil from it and not wanted to think about it.
Exactly, Fantastic film. And then we get, as with so many horror subgenres, it feels like moving into the 60s and 70s, there's quite a boom of these types of movies.
Yeah.
Why is that, do you think? Is it because this kind of, Satanism and all of this area is kind of linked to hippiedom and counterculture and
most definitely. I mean, it started out really in the early 60s, then in fact even earlier than that, the early 50s, there'd been a bit of a Crowley revival. There'd been this book by John Simmons called The Great Beast in 1951. It's not a great book, to be honest. You kind of get the impression reading it that he didn't like Crowley very much at all. And he did another book a few years later, in 1958, called The Magic of Aleister Crowley, which was a much better book.
Yeah.
But the thing is, The Great Beast gripped the imagination of the public. And suddenly, he was back in the public eye again, as indeed was Dennis Wheatley.
Oh, yes.
Who'd been writing Tales of the Occult for many years up to this point. And apparently by the early 1960s, it's reckoned he was selling 1 million copies of his books every year.
Wow.
So there was really a definite interest already sort of setting up here as we went into the 1960s. And, of course, his books have been adapted into films. There were two earlier on. There was The Forbidden Territory in 1934 and The Secret of Stamboul in 1936. Neither of them horror.
Right.
But by the end of the 60s, we'd got The Devil Rides Out from Hammer, which is a masterpiece. And again, I will fight anyone who says otherwise.
Agreed.
It is one of my favourite Hammer films of all time.
You believe in the power of darkness. That's a superstition. Now, there you were wrong. The power of darkness is more than just a superstition. It is a living force which can be tapped at any given moment of the night. Why, on one night of 1 year, should these people live in mortal fear?
Less successful was The Lost Continent, which I have a soft spot for, but it's certainly not Devil Rides Out. And as we went into the 1970s, Hammer did a third one. They did a trilogy of it. They did To the Devil a Daughter, which I think is somewhat overlooked sometimes. It's not a great film, but I don't think it's a disaster people make it out to be.
Totally.
There's a lot going on in it. So I think in the 60s, it was beginning to build up. This is sort of interest in the occult. In 1966, we had this guy, Anton LaVey, whose name will pop up, I'm sure, a lot during this season. And he declared 1966 as Anno Satanus, the first year of the Age of Satan.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and he set up it was originally a group called the Order of the Trapezoid, which I don't really understand. I must admit, but much later on became a much more understandable Church of Satan, which was a very, very influential group in America, because it was the first really big, credible attempt to do a Satanist church.
Yes.
There'd been really not much evidence that there was any sort of organised Satanism before this. And he set this group up and they became a global phenomenon.
Wow.
And in fact, they even had reportedly people like Sammy Davis Jr. and Jane Mansfield as members of the Church of Satan. And so there's a huge deal in the 1960s and carried on being a huge deal into the 1980s. We had this whole satanic panic thing in the 80s. Where the church was accused of all sorts of criminal activity, including ritual abuse of children and adults. And so they were a big deal at the time, and they still going today. LaVey died in 1997, but the church carries on without him, you know. And, I mentioned earlier the Process Church, which, were not really Satanist, but, they were sort of lumped in with them. So this was all growing. This was all there in the background. This was all part of the culture of the mid to late 1960s, particularly in America. And I think what was happening, I think younger people at that time, they'd grown up after the Second World War. They'd grown up in an era of relative prosperity in America in the 1950s. But that had brought with it this sort of rampant consumerism and materialism. And I think young people were looking for something a bit more spiritual, and mainstream religion had kind of let them down. As the counterculture began to develop from about 66, 67 onwards, mainstream religion was very sort of dismissive of it. It was very sort of, the counterculture believed in drugs and believed in free sex and all the rest, all the things that the church wouldn't want you to do. So the church was not going to be an answer for these kids. So they started looking for more esoteric forms of worship. And of course, the occult and Satanism, it popped up, and there it was. It was ripe for the taking,
Riders on the storm. Into this house we're born. Into this world we're thrown.
Now, before we move into some of the movies of the 60s and 70s, I want to play you a little snippet of a conversation that I had with a really interesting guy. His name's David Huckvale. Now, he's worked as a researcher, a writer, a presenter for BBC Radio, a lecturer, and he's recently written a book called Movie Magick, the Occult in Film. So, of course, I could not miss the opportunity to chat to him about this. Now, if you are subscribed to our Patreon channel, you can hear the entire chat. I sat down and talked with David for about an hour, all about all things occultism in literature and theatre and film and a bunch of other things. So you can hear that chat over there. But I thought I'd play you this little snippet in which he talks to me a little bit about particularly the 1960s and 70s and the way in which occultism and the teachings of Aleister Crowley kind of seeped their way into music and into cinema. So here is a little 5-minute snippet of my chat with the brilliant David Huckvale.
I think what happened in the 60s was that Crowley became suddenly fashionable because before then, I mean, poor chap, he kind of died very poor in a boarding house in Sussex and kind of failed in his mission, although he hadn't failed in the sense of being a great writer and a great thinker, but he was not on everyone's lips. But then, of course, came the Summer of Love in 1967 and the Sgt. Pepper album and Aleister Crowley appearing on that, along with other people who fitted in very well with that kind of occult subworld, people like Oscar Wilde, he was there. Well, I mean, Aleister Crowley was one of the early members of the Order of the Golden Dawn in 1898. The Beatles also had Huxley there, and of course Huxley had written The Doors of Perception, which was about his experimentations with mescaline, the hallucinogenic drug. Well, that was very much up Aleister Crowley's street. He was experimenting with drugs and altering your consciousness, expanding your consciousness. That fits in very well with what hippie culture's all about. So all these people were on the cover, and they made sense to be on the cover. Lennon wanted Hitler as well as Christ, but was perhaps advisedly told not to. It would be interesting. It would be interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, rather offensive to many people, but it would be interesting if he had been allowed to put Hitler on the cover, because he would have fitted in an odd, perverted sort of a way, being interested in all this occultism. So I can see what Lennon was thinking about in wanting to have him there. But anyway, what happened was that came out, and it started a revival of Crowley. So virtually every big rock band who was anybody in the 60s was interested in Crowley. So you've got the Doors, who are named after the Doors of Perception.
Right.
Huxley's
I never
book.
knew that.
Yeah,
right.
That's where they get their name. Jim Morrison was fascinated by Crowley. There's on their album The Doors 13, there's a photograph of Jim Morrison with a bust of Aleister Crowley. And then you've got Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page, who was obsessed by Crowley and collected all the books. I'd love to have seen that library. Bought Boleskine House. That's something else we can talk about, actually. Aleister Crowley's place up in Loch Ness.
Right.
He bought the house. He I think he even, on Led Zeppelin 3, that album, he has inscribed on the vinyl, "So mote it be, do what thou wilt." I think that's what he puts on there. But I mean, so it's an obvious reference to Crowley. Then you get films like Lucifer Rising.
Yeah,
Kenneth Anger's films.
Yeah.
And that connects with Mick Jagger and the Stones, because Mick Jagger's brother, Chris, briefly appears in this movie, and Jimmy Page is in it, and you see Jimmy Page with this famous Egyptian a reproduction of this famous Egyptian artifact called the Stele of Ankh Efen Khonsu, or the Stele of Revealing, as it's known. And this is the artifact that is meant to have somehow channeled this strange entity called Aiwas, who dictated the new religion of Telema to Aleister Crowley. Amazingly, that object in the museum where he first saw it had the catalogue number of 666, the number of the beast, so that was a rather interesting coincidence. But so I mean, all these people are doing it, and so I think, as I said, Jimmy Page is in Lucifer Rising.
Yes.
And of course the Stones, they became associated because of at this, I think it's the Altamont Free Festival, that song "Sympathy for the Devil," and during that,
course.
Meredith Hunter was killed by a member of Hell's Angels.
That's right.
You know?
Yes. This was going to be this kind of big sort of equivalent to Woodstock type.
That's right.
Yes, that's right.
And while they were singing it, this terrible thing happened. They're not really related, but because of the mood of the time, and they're singing a song with the word devil in it. I mean, the song is really a Nietzschean song, if you
yes.
want. It's not really about sympathy for the devil, but saying, you know, the devil's in all of us. And
yes.
It's more like Nietzsche's title of Nietzsche's book, Human, All Too Human. I mean, we are human, all too human. So it's really not what people think it is. So yeah, that started all that off. So I think it's all related to hippiedom, who of course hippies wanted power too. They just wanted flower power.
Yeah, that's so true.
But it was it was anti-establishment, free love, consciousness expanding, a frustration with the way things were. Crowley seemed to offer a gateway into this promised land, which of course went terribly wrong, and by the 70s it had all become rather nasty.
Yes, he like you say, he gave them a great gateway, and then he also gave the other side a great excuse to kind of call all of this counterculture evil in some ways.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yes,
people saying Led Zeppelin's music was evil and Pink Floyd and all
well,
that.
The Beatles. I mean, they've the amount of conspiracy theories of the Beatles. You know that album Help, where they're meant to be semaphoring the letters of hell.
Yes.
Well, the story is that they did the letters for help, but it didn't look right. So on aesthetic grounds, they're meant to have just done something else. And they spell a different set of letters. Well, I mean, there are two ways you can interpret that. The semaphores look very like some photographs that Aleister Crowley had made of himself doing some sort of Egyptian ritual. The actual letters are NUJV. So George is doing, if you're thinking in terms of Aleister Crowley, George is doing what Crowley said was Osiris slain. John is doing something about Typhon, or Set. And Ringo's doing Set fighting. But Paul doesn't really fit, but he's doing the letter J, and of course this lets people who want a conspiracy theory have the fantasy that Paul had died. You know, he's meant to have died in this car accident and replaced by someone called James.
Oh, wow.
And so they say NUJV means new unknown James vocalist. Well, I mean, you can make a conspiracy about anything, can't you?
Yes.
But I mean, the significant thing is that the occult became a kind of fashion, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain philosophical ideas behind all this that would fit into what the Beatles believed in, and they did say, didn't they? I mean, Lennon said the whole point of the Beatles is do what you want.
Yes.
So that fits in perfectly with Crowley. So I'm sure they knew about Crowley, obviously, and they were interested. But it doesn't necessarily make them into evil Satanists.
No, it's so interesting. And then, of course, you've got Helter Skelter and the Manson family, and they were kind of trying to make their murders look like Satanists or witches had done it, didn't they? And all of that kind of thing. So it all connects.
It's all part of the fashion of the time, and also the philosophy of freedom and anarchy in a way that people wanted. But as I say, by the 70s, it all became rather sour.
And there we go, the brilliant David Huckvale there. He had so much more interesting stuff to say, and if you want to hear the rest of that conversation, then simply subscribe to our Patreon channel. Go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. If you're happy to donate $5 to help support the podcast, then you will have access to countless free episodes. All throughout the summer during the podcast hiatus, I was releasing weekly bonus episodes over on Patreon, and as soon as you join up and subscribe, you'll have access to everything we've ever published on there. So much good stuff. We've reviewed new releases, we've reviewed some old classics, I've counted down my top 10 horror movies, a whole bunch of other stuff, lots of interviews with filmmakers and other lovely special treats. So if you want to sign up, please do go over to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror, as well as all that bonus content. If you're based in the UK, you'll get a sticker and you'll get a special thank you and a shout out on the podcast. Speaking of, I'm going to give everyone who has subscribed and joined up in the last few weeks a special thank you, including Richard Bonham, Sarah Dixon, Verity Harrington, Michael Bell, Josh Slater-Williams, Emma, Matt Beresford, Hugh McStay, Nicholas Giandelia, M, Mark Cleary, Matt Zamzo, Michael Walters, Brent Terhune, Charlotte Hodson Truss, Lewis Shaw, Flora Quitman, Chris Beaver, Kieran Nolan Jones, Caitlin Duffy, Rachel Welsh, Alex Uss, Brad Hanson, Harry Steele, Owen Griffiths, Brittany Chapman, Dave Curtis, Chris Spence, Sean Holgate, Christopher Richmond, Andrew Connor, Rick Rawlins, Ashley Cope, Claire Duncan, Murray Lothian, Joanne Lawson, Graham Lockie, Ethan Lurcher, Hannah Ogilvie, Dan Hill, Matt Wolfe and Patrick Ryan. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up to our Patreon channel over the last couple of months. And one more time, if you'd like to join these guys, get a special shout out, get a sticker and get countless bonus episodes of the podcast, then please sign up to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Okay, let's return to our chat with the brilliant Kevin Lyons. Now, of course, Kenneth Anger was a hugely important person in this era.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about him. Who was Kenneth Anger?
Well, Kenneth Anger is an interesting chap. He was an American filmmaker and author.
Yes.
And a long-time Thelemite. So he's actually part of the whole Thelema belief system. He really bought into that. And he was a guy who actually... A lot of these people actually sort of made films about the occult, and a lot of the bands did music about the occult. You have to wonder how much of it was just for show, or did you actually believe this? Kenneth Anger believed this. He lived this lifestyle, you know? And, you know, he was... He made these films, My Demon Brother in 1960, Invocation of My Demon Brother in 1969, and Lucifer Rising in 1972. That says everything you need to know. He was bringing his Thelemite beliefs into his films. His films are very weird, they're very experimental, they're very odd, but that kind of, in a way, that kind of buys into the whole occult thing. You know, it is experimenting, it is trying to open up these doors of perception again, but this time through film. And a little connection back to what we were saying just now, Lucifer Rising was originally going to have a soundtrack by Jimmy Page.
That's right.
And they had a bit of a falling out, as that tends to happen a lot in occult circles, that people, you know, you wander off this prescribed path, which is really odd, you know, that we're here to sort of explore all sorts of...
the kind of freedom of it.
Yeah, but if you wander off too far, well, you're out. I'm going to have an argument with you.
Yeah.
And he got chucked out. And weirdly, they met, Kenneth Anger and Jimmy Page met at an auction in London where they were both bidding on Crowley memorabilia.
Oh, wow.
And that's how they hit it off.
That's really interesting.
So it was a very small world that they occupied.
Yeah.
But yeah, Anger was great because, like I say, he lived it. He lived the whole thing. He joined this group called the Ordo Template Orientis, which was a Thelemic group. It was, you know, one of the offshoots of Crowley's work, and he was a friend of LaVey long before the setting up of the Church of Satan. So he lived this lifestyle. So he was one of the very few artists at the time who wasn't just paying lip service to the occult. You know, his films were a product of his occult beliefs, you know. And again, I can highly recommend them. They're not for everyone. They are very strange films. You've seen them, haven't you? I can tell by the
have.
Yeah,
So I've just bought,
I've
just bought the set, and I've just watched Lucifer Rising for the first time. I haven't seen any of the others yet, and I'm going to try and give them all a go. Because they're short films, at least. They're
short,
not feature length.
Absolutely, no, they're short. And they are fascinating.
Very much a product of their time, like you said.
Very much.
And I guess there's definitely, again, links to Aleister Crowley, in that there is a kind of, he was generally just this outsider in all kinds of ways, wasn't he?
And Anger, you see, he was openly gay, and he was not part of the Hollywood mainstream. So again, he felt like an outsider. So again, he was attracted to the whole sort of Thelemic thing, because it's like, come and join us. We won't judge you. You know, you're one of us. Come and join us. You know, and so that you can see the attraction for outsiders. I think, you know, and you know, I've never particularly been an outsider, but I've always been a bit of a loner, and I think sometimes you do look at these groups, you think, actually, I can kind of see,
think
the sense of belonging.
There's definitely a link to being a horror fan, I think, right? Look at the group of people that you'll get at Fright Fest every year, or for example, you know, there is something again of that kind of, if you're into horror, there is a link to being into occultism, I think.
Of course there is.
You're usually an outsider in some way.
You're definitely outside mainstream society. Yeah. And, you know, isn't things like... Oh, I'm getting all philosophical here. You know, do put a stop to me if I go too far. But isn't things like going to Fright Fest something like a ritual? Isn't it something like going to a Thelemic temple to worship your gods? You know, and if your gods happen to be George Romero, then fine, that's great. You know, if your god happens to be Anubis, that's fine as well. But you know, so people gather at this sort of temple of horror
Yeah.
in London's West End to worship. You know what? And
it's likely they might dress a certain way. They might wear similar T-shirts with film titles on them or whatever it might be.
They emblazon themselves with their sort of the badges of what they believe in. Yeah, absolutely. And I totally get that. And growing up, I was very much into that. You find your kindred spirits, and it is your secret. Yeah. You are a little closed society that no one else is allowed into.
And it's the same as if you're into heavy metal music or
exactly.
Dungeons and Dragons. It's all these kind of like niche areas.
Of course
isn't it?
And of course, all of these things have at one time been linked with the occult.
Yes.
Heavy metal, you mentioned earlier, the playing records backwards, which always surprises me because they say things like, one of the Led Zeppelin things was things like, "Oh, my sweet Jesus" or something.
Yeah.
And you think, well, no, not a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it comes back to that like the Exorcist type thing.
Yeah.
Of like, well, actually, and that's quite interesting because, so we've got all of this kind of weird, crazy, progressive stuff going on. And then in mainstream, we have got movies like The Omen, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby. Yeah. They were quite high budget Hollywood movies.
Oh, yeah, they were proper studio films,
And I do think that fundamentally they do still have the kind of old-fashioned the devil is bad, God is good message behind them.
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah. But we still embrace them.
Yes,
we still embrace them. We embrace them because they're
great,
brilliant films. That's why we embrace them. Yeah. But yes, because they're from the mainstream.
Yes.
They will sort of keep that mainstream view that sort of God is good, the devil is bad.
Yes.
And you find that less so, I think, in sort of other films, the low budget, the independent films. They tend to be a little bit more transgressive.
Yeah.
But, we all like to be transgressive. We all like to be alternative. But come on, The Exorcist and The Omen. I mean, who's going to argue with these? These are great films.
They're just so scary. They are scary, whether you believe or not,
Like I said to you earlier, I don't need to believe in the devil to be frightened by what's going on in The Exorcist.
Yes.
It frightens me. It's one of the few films that still does.
Does it? So I was going to ask you about your history with The Exorcist. What did you see it? When did you see it for the first time?
Well, I've got a slightly complicated history with it, so bear with me. I first saw it in the late 1970s in the cinema. Yes, I am that old. And I don't know whether it was a reissue or whether it was just still around. I mean, it's difficult to tell back then.
That
the film's
must have
just
been so exciting.
I'd read about it for years and years and years. I started reading about horror films when I was about 10 or 11. Mum and Dad wouldn't let me watch them because they were too scary. And so by the time I got to about, I think it must be 16 or 17, I was a very big guy even then, so I could get into I just went up to the desk and said, "One, please." And they never questioned me, so I managed to get into the what was then X films. And finally getting to see The Exorcist, and I thought, this is the best film I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I then saw 2001 about 3 weeks later, and I thought, this is the best film I've ever seen. And that's what it's like when you're that age. Every film you see is the best film you've ever seen. It leaves such a mark on you as you grow up. And then years later, because, again, younger listeners won't have gone through the horrors of this, that The Exorcist wasn't available in this country. It was, I don't think it was ever banned. It was just, I think Warners were pretty much told by the BBFC, which was then being run by James Thurman, if you try and submit it, we probably won't pass it.
Yes.
So they didn't bother to submit it.
Right. So it's just never in circulation.
And so it was never in circulation. So the only way you got to see it again was on, in my case, a dreadful sort of nth generation videotape, which was smeary as hell. It was horrible. The colours were faded. And I watched and I thought, what the hell? This is awful.
Yes.
This is a terrible film. Why do people rave about this? And for years I would go around telling people that Mark Kermode didn't know what he was talking about because The Exorcist is bloody awful, blah, 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 blah. And then I got my first DVD player. And I'd bought, don't judge me, I'd bought a James Bond film as my first DVD.
Fair enough.
And in the chaos of a house move, I moved house and bought the DVD player the day I moved.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find my disc, so I thought, I'll go and rent something. So I went up to the local video shop. Again, young people won't remember video shops, but they're wonderful things. I do miss them.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to the horror section of the DVDs, and the only thing that was there that sort of vaguely appeared was The Exorcist. So I thought, go on then, give it a go. So I took it home. And I just moved in, so I was wearing headphones because I didn't want to upset my neighbours. So I got headphones on. And I was sort of sitting there, arms folded. Go on then, freaking, impress me. And after about 20 minutes, I'm sobbing into my I can't watch this, it's too scary. It was absolutely terrifying, particularly with the headphones on, the sound travelling around.
You killed your mother!
Your servant!
You left her alone to die!
Shut
Shut up! I'll never forgive you!
Shut up!
Bastard!
And ever since then, I've been madly in love with The Exorcist, and I still think it's the finest example of an occult movie ever made. I think it's never been beaten.
It is truly scary, and I think I had a similar experience in that. I think when I first watched it, I don't want to make you feel old here, Kev, because I first saw it when I was young, and it was the late 90s, and it was when.
Shut up!
It was when it was released. I think it was the sort of 25th anniversary edition, and it had Mark Kermode's documentary on it as well, which I loved. I think at the time it was, for somebody young, I was like, oh, it's not actually as shocking as people say, and it takes a while to get going. This isn't what I was hoping it would be, And then I kind of watched it a couple more times as I got older, and I thought, you start to. There's something much more insidious about it than immediately meets the eye. I used to find the beginning really boring when it's in Iraq and all of that stuff's going on. I used to want to skip that. And now I find that stuff really kind of dread-inducing and unsettling. I think it is a film that sneaks up on you and it stays with you, and it is.
And it's not hard to see why it was such a big hit.
Yeah.
Not hard to see at all. Not only is it terrifying, but it has got, like we said earlier, it's got that good triumphs over evil ending. The young soul is redeemed, and it's, the poor priest who was losing his faith, he finds a way out.
All of that stuff as well.
All of it beautifully done, beautifully written, beautifully directed, and it was a massive. I think it's easy now to forget that it wasn't just a hit; it was a phenomenon.
It was a blockbuster, right? It wasn't actually early blockbuster.
It was. I mean, pre-Jaws, it was the biggest. I mean, you can still find it if you go on YouTube and have a look, just type in The Exorcist newsreels or whatever, and see people being interviewed on the way in and out of it, and the shock on their faces when they come out, because nobody's seen anything quite like it. It was a big deal back then.
The manager of the National Theatre in Westwood says that there indeed are at least a dozen people who faint or become ill during every showing. But The Exorcist is still drawing sellout houses for every performance, complete with lines around the block.
And because it was set in an identifiable modern day, it was very much saying this could happen to you. It wasn't sort of set in sort of oldie worldy times like the Hammer films were. Which were, don't get me wrong, I love Hammer films, but they weren't speaking to me because they weren't they were just great films. The Exorcist is very much sort of. This could happen now.
God. Yeah, that's it. Like Hammer feels kind of escapist, whereas these don't. Yeah. Rosemary's Baby's the same. I kind of watched it as a kid, and I kind of thought, it's quite fun. I watched it now as an adult, and I think, God, this is the kind of the layers of horror when it comes to sort of marital rape and gaslighting and all of these other elements to it. Whereas an adult, you think, God, this is really fucking scary.
Absolutely.
Without the demonic baby at the end.
And just the horror of city living. I mean, if you don't live in a city, you don't know what that's like. The horrors that come with that. The great things as well, but the horrors, and it's all there in that film. So these films were brilliant for just dragging the horror film into the 20th century as it was then, and sort of saying, look. It's coming for you. The horror's not safe anymore. We're going to take you by the scruff of the neck and we're going to make you watch this.
Susie Banyan decided to perfect her ballet studies in the most famous school of dance in Europe. She chose the celebrated Academy of Fribourg. One day at 9 a.m, she left Kennedy Airport, New York, and arrived in Germany at 10:40 p.m. local time.
And then we've got, your beloved Argento and some lovely witchy movies in the late 70s, early 80s as well. And actually witches, we barely talked about witches really, but they've got to be one of the most popular monsters, or if you even want to call them monsters, in film.
Absolutely. I mean, right back to Shakespeare and Macbeth, they've been there sort of, causing all sorts of trouble for people. And yes, Argento made... Well, he made a trilogy of them, but we try not to think about too much about the third one. But the first two, Suspiria and Inferno, Mother of Tears, doesn't it doesn't exist. I don't acknowledge it. No. But no, the first two, I mean, they're fantastic films. What he did, two very clever things he did. He took this sort of very Italian form of the giallo and melded it onto the sort of satanic panic films of the 70s. He wasn't the first to do it, incidentally. Sergio Martino did it in 1972 with All the Colours of the Dark, which is kind of a Rosemary's Baby type thing with a bit of the giallo feel to it. But Argento did it best. I mean, he really sort of elevated. What he really brought to it was this fantastic dark fairy tale theme to it. Almost And I can feel people starting to prickle at this before I've even said it. Almost a kind of folk horror feel to it.
Yeah.
There is this sort of like, you know, the past is coming to get you sort of thing, you know. And it's like particularly in the first film, she's quite a modern woman, Susie Bannion. She's very sort of, you know, modern for the 1970s. She's very together. And then suddenly these ancient witches are coming together, and she's got no real defence against that at first, you know.
And there's something of this kind of sheer disorientation about that movie as well.
Yes.
It like logic and everything just seems to kind of evaporate away as the movie goes on.
There's no logic. And while you're trying to work out what little logic there is, you're being pummeled to death by this soundtrack, which just assaults you.
And we do end up in like almost anger-esque kind of psychedelia.
Yes,
almost,
absolutely.
You know,
it becomes incredibly psychedelic towards the end with all the lighting effects and this, you know, her friend coming back as a zombie and all that. I mean, it's really sort of odd, really weird film. And Inferno goes even further. Inferno, the narrative breaks down in the first 10 minutes and he doesn't bother getting it back at all for the rest of the film. It's just, you know, good luck, hold on tight, and let's see if we can get to the end credits.
Enjoy the ride.
Exactly. And it's a brilliant, brilliant ride, a magnificent ride, but you know, I don't think you go into an Argento film, to be perfectly honest, looking for logic
or even narrative. You know?
No. And these, I think, you know, particularly Suspiria and particularly Inferno, I think they took it as far as it could go for Argento. I think later on when he sort of did, you know, chucked away the narrative, he looked a bit silly in some of his later films. In these, they're perfect. Absolutely perfect.
What did you think of what they did with the remake, Luca Guadagnino, or dare I ask?
I survived having told all your listeners that I didn't like Dawn of the Dead very much. I'm not sure I'm going to get away with this one.
Well, no, do you know what? I don't think many people liked it.
I really did not like the new Suspiria at all, no. And I liked it at the end when it freaked out completely, when it went completely nuts in the final moments.
Yes.
I thought if we'd had more of that.
That was a bit more Argento.
That was a bit more Argento. I thought, finally, you're showing that you've actually watched an Argento film. I loved the bit at the end. I just thought getting there was just like, you know, Argento,
it was very worthy.
Argento did it in an hour and a half, and it took 2.5 hours to do this. And I thought, you've added nothing except an hour.
Yes.
You know, and that's all you brought to the party is an hour. You know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think, you know, like linked in with what we said about this idea that Satanism or whatever you want to call it became quite appealing to young people, and then, you know, I think it's the same with witchcraft, right? I mean, we've had kind of good witches, quote unquote, I suppose, since Haxan, right?
Yes,
but the idea that in the sort of moving into the 80s and 90s, you had the Witches of Eastwick, and you had, you know, Hocus Pocus, even, and suddenly witches were
and things like that, which is a great little film.
Now is the time, now is the hour. Ours is the magic, ours is the power.
The craft is, I mean, the amount, you know, I kind of spoke to a lot of people, you know, guests on this series, and I said, I'm doing Occult and Witches.
Yeah.
The amount of people that have requested to talk about the craft,
I can
female
imagine.
guests, all of them want to talk, you know, there is so much love for the craft, you know, as a film.
And it would be better suited for you to talk to your female guests about this, is obviously coming from a male perspective, but to me, it does feel a little bit like women are kind of taking back the term witch.
Yes.
It's becoming a positive thing. It's becoming an alternative lifestyle.
Yes.
You know, and I think there was a book called The Spiral Dance, A Rebirth of the Ancient Religion of the Great Goddess by somebody called Starhawk in 1979. This was a huge bestseller. I think it's on to its third edition now.
Yes.
And that really sort of laid the groundwork for a lot of this, saying that actually this is quite empowering.
Right, well, I had a fascinating chat, actually, and I'm sure I'll get into this as the series goes on, but with Anna Bogutskaya from the BFI and the Final Girls, and we talked about, I think it was when we were talking about Suspiria, funnily enough, and she was talking about how the witch is one of the only figures of power that is exclusively female.
Yes.
And when you look at kind of other quote unquote, you know, strong, powerful women in film, they're usually given masculine traits, whether it be Ripley or whatever, you know. Whereas the witch is something that can and is only female, you know, and coded as female.
And the witch is this like you were saying, this fantastic figure of great power.
Yes.
And which has been horribly misunderstood over time, deliberately so by you know, sort of religious patriarchy.
Yeah.
But I think now it's being taken back, and I think, you know, there's been a rising interest in Wicca in the last couple of decades. I think, and it's not something I was particularly a fan of, but I think actually Buffy the Vampire Slayer helped a little bit.
Yeah. Very much tied in with the witchcraft, I think. Buffy,
yes,
you know.
that whole sort of positive presentation of Wicca and witchcraft as being a very positive force for young women.
Yeah, yeah.
And it sort of it enables them. It enables a sort of. It's empowering.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to say we have this power.
Yeah.
Men don't have this.
Yes.
This is ours.
Yes.
To do with as we please. And you know what? We're not going to do what men do with it. We're not going to be dicks and start wars and start fighting with each other. We're going to do positive things with it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and The Craft is a very good example of that. You know, and it's like,
and I guess, you know, no longer were witches coded as old crones. Or
no,
anything
not
like
at
that
all.
anymore
No,
as well.
they were just young women doing young women's things.
Exactly.
You know, they were cool.
Yeah.
Suddenly, witches became cool,
Exactly.
and that's not a bad thing. I think sometimes, much as I adore the film The Witch, I think that does, at the end,
it sets us
it's
back
empowering.
a bit.
It sets us back a little bit because, you know, yes, you're empowered by this, but by doing so, you have to murder your family first. Well, you know, I love the film, don't get me wrong. I absolutely adore it.
That is a film that truly scares me as well.
That's a terrifying
There is something,
film.
people talk about evil in the celluloid in The Exorcist. I think there's something evil in The Witch. Like, I don't know why shots of trees scare me as much as they do in that film, but it truly gets to my soul, that film.
And may all my transgressions be washed, and my transgressions and make me chaste and pure. Washed and chaste and pure. Make me chaste and pure. May my light be here now. May my light be here. May my guiding me, protecting me.
There does seem to be, and we talked about this with folk horror, and it all kind of links in, but there does seem to have been another kind of little boom of these movies the last sort of 10 years or so, from The Devil's Candy to obviously The Witch, even Drag Me to Hell, Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell, which is basically casting the runes.
Of course it
right?
is, absolutely. Of course it is.
You know, even Hereditary to a point.
Yes.
Like, you know, there suddenly these kind of things are scaring us again, it
yes,
feels like. You know.
they are. And I think part of that is we see these little booms in horror, and I think they sort of reflect what goes on in the real world.
Yes.
And as we sit here in sort of, you know, September 2019, the world has gone insane.
It really
the
has.
world has got. You've got. I mean, in my 58 years on this planet, I've never known a time quite as terrifying in the real world as it is now. So I think, you know, as horror films come back and sort of say to us, yeah, you're scared, but here's how you deal with it.
Yeah.
This is the way of looking at it. And also, I think with things like, you know, witchcraft movies, they actually beginning to say to us, here's an answer.
Yes.
This might be the way out. If you're just willing to give up to it and, you know, sort of put up with the ridicule that people will inevitably give you for it, then I think this might be the answer. This might be the way out.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And there are two sides to it. There's also the kind of, there's the Omen kind of thing, which is, I think, you know, quite relevant to now, which is that maybe there is somebody up in power that is evil, and you know that maybe this evil is actually systemic. You know, like that there is something bigger and more powerful than all of us.
That's right.
You know, that has evil intentions.
And they offer us reassurance by saying, actually, we will win in the end,
yes.
which invariably we do.
Yes.
You know, we go through scary times and we do come out of it
yes.
at the end. Somehow the human race muddles through. I'm not quite sure how much longer we can keep doing that, but we have muddled through all the time before. And I think, there's this cathartic thing with horror films, always has been.
Yeah.
But I think particularly in times of stress like we're under now, we're seeing a lot more horror films.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot more thoughtful horror films, and we are seeing horror films which are presenting us with alternative ways of living.
Exactly.
And I think that's fascinating.
Do you think, final question, I want to go back to the devil himself.
The
devil himself is do you think we've come so far now, and I think we're more secular these days and everything else. Do you think that the devil as a monster scares us? And you know, I was thinking back to depictions of the devil in cinema, and more often than not these days it's comedy, whether it's Adam Sandler and Little Nicky, or whether it's South Park, or whether it's Robert De Niro in Angel Heart, or Al Pacino in The Devil's Advocate. You don't get so many horror films anymore about the devil.
You don't. And that's an interesting one, isn't it? I think he has lost his power to shock. Unless you have very strong religious beliefs, in which case I think then obviously he's still very frightening for you. I think for the rest of us, I think he's lost his power to shock, sadly. I don't think he's as scary as he used to be. I think his minions are scarier. And I think they're scarier because they're human.
Yes.
And because humans are unpredictable and violent, and they'll do horrible things to each other, you know, and I think that's where we're going now. So we're seeing things like Hereditary, where, you know, you have got these people who are living an alternative lifestyle, but possibly not a positive one.
No, exactly.
And it's that kind of thing. I think we're seeing more the devil's minions rather than the devil himself. He may make a comeback.
You never know.
I hope he does.
Yeah, he may.
I kind of miss him, to be honest.
Well, exactly. It's probably easier to do just make a film that it suggests it more than, make a film about Trump or Boris Johnson, basically.
Somebody somewhere, if they haven't done so already, will be making a film about, they'll be remaking The Omen with Trump.
There's no better time to redo The Omen, actually.
Absolutely. There's this horror in the White House.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a few of your listeners tuning out right now, coming looking for me. I do apologise.
No, I think we're all in agreement there.
I do hope so.
Yeah. I think that there are still movies that dabble in it that are still shocking people today. Last year at London Film Festival, I don't know whether you saw Lords of Chaos.
Yes.
No. You had this dream, this vision. You were in control. You were a leader. You could still be all of those things if you wanted to.
Everyone around you are disgusting little insects. Let's go!
My God, I mean, not sort of overtly about Satanism or the occult, but about that kind of link with heavy metal music and that world. And it's the first time in my life, I've seen it twice now, and both screenings I was in, people fainted in it.
Really?
And that is...
Wow.
And it's so funny how, again, going back to... We never even talked about The Devils, actually, did we? But going back to some of those movies from the 70s that shocked people the most.
Yeah.
They were usually films that dabbled in kind of quote-unquote evil.
Oh, of course they were. Yeah.
I
mean, that big boom in devil movies.
Yes.
We talked about The Devils. That was one of the most shocking films of...
Yes.
1971 was a hell of a year for the BBFC, wasn't it? Because they were dealing with Straw Dogs, A Clockwork Orange, and The Devils.
Oh, my God.
They had these three really outrageously shocking films, and I think The Devils probably went further than any of them.
Yes, I would say
and I think, as I mentioned earlier, there was this really nice article by this guy who's a Catholic saying, guys, I think we've got this wrong.
Yeah.
I think maybe its time is coming. I think it's beginning to find its audience now, outside of us sort of cultists who, like horror movies. I think it's beginning to find a different audience.
Well,
now.
it's actually beautifully well made, that film, isn't it?
I have a sort of strange relationship with Ken Russell. I love some of his films and loathe so many of them as well.
He's done a lot of trash.
Oh my God, some of it is unwatchable. But The Devils is just, I mean, it shows what can be done when he put his mind to it. And of course, he was from a Catholic background. He'd got issues with that, and it all came flooding out in this sort of howl of rage in this film. And it's
Well, I think that's it. And, we've talked about it already, but going back to, the history of us, really, if you mess with, if you prod at religion or Catholicism or Christianity, you're going to suffer. It's not going to be well received.
No, exactly.
And, look at, obviously The Devils. Was it banned or was
there was I think it was 17 local authorities in Britain refused to let it be seen.
And, even movies like Life of Brian, it's like if you mess with Christianity or Jesus or God.
Well, Life of Brian, I believe I'm right in saying, the rights were sold to Channel 4 and they were told they could show it once or twice or something like that, and they had to precede it with a warning. And it's a comedy film. It's Monty Python.
So I'll ask you the really difficult question. Of all these movies we've talked about that deal with the occult, what's your favourite?
It's not a difficult question at all. It is The Exorcist.
It is The Exorcist.
It is The Exorcist. And with The Exorcist 3 is a very close second.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Exorcist 2, absolute rubbish. No, won't have anything to do with that. But Exorcist 3...
That's a scary film.
Again, just a little story, just to finish off. I saw that at an all-night horror festival in Camden when it first opened, like 1889, something like that.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the internet back then, so we didn't know what was coming. We knew it was the sequel to The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And that scene, with the nurse.
Do you know what makes me so sad now is that everyone has seen that scene because of the internet. We all know it's coming. But my God.
When we saw that, honestly, I was with a mate who, he used to edit a fanzine that I used to write for, and that scene came out, and this audience full of hardened horror fans who were outside trading copies of Cannibal Holocaust, they screamed en masse, and I gripped the arm of my chair, and my mate turned to look at me, and he just said very quietly, "We won't talk about this." It was so terrifying.
It's wonderful. I think it is I think it's one of the best jump scares ever.
Absolutely.
In cinema.
And the ending is compromised by having to have an exorcism, but I still think it works.
It's great,
and it works the same way as the original does. That
yes.
It's about this good man who sort of goes up against evil and wins in the end.
It's basically the only sequel to The Exorcist, isn't it? Let's be honest. You can ignore number 2 and ignore whatever else came after.
There's a rumour that there was a second one, but I don't believe it. It sounds too outrageous for me to believe in. To be honest,
I'm sure there was some kind of prequel. Was there The Exorcist: The Beginning? Or there's been a load of movies.
There's been rumours about this stuff. I'll have nothing to do with it. I'm not even interested in looking into that.
No, exactly. So Kev, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
We had to rattle through a lot there.
There's a lot more we could have talked about.
A lot to cover, but there's plenty more. There's several more weeks to follow in which we're going to go into all these different things in depth.
Excellent. I shall look forward to listening to those.
Where can people find you out there on social media or stuff you've written?
They can find me at my website, and I'm going to have to rattle through this, aren't I? The Encyclopedia of Fantastic Film and Television, EOFFTV.com. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram now as well. I've got See, I'm down with the kids.
You're getting with the kids,
yeah. I know it works, I may be 58, but I'm still cutting edge, you know what I mean? But so you can find me on that. You can come and have a chat with me. I'm not as scary as I look, honestly. I may be a bit slow at replying, but I do talk to people. But yeah.
Absolutely. Kev, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my brilliant guests, Kevin Lyons and David Huckvale. Don't forget, if you want to hear more of my conversation with David, simply go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror, and if you are a donor, then you can hear that whole hour-long chat now. So, what did you think of this week's episode? And what do you think of the choice in subgenre for this series, the occult? Are you a fan of these movies? What's your favourite occult movie? What occult movie are you hoping that we might cover? Please do get in touch and let me know. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. And if you follow us on Letterboxd, you can keep up to date with what films we're going to be covering in depth this series. That's letterboxd.com/evolutionpod. You can find all previous episodes and seasons of this podcast on our website. That's evolutionofhorror.com. There's also a blog section on there. If you want to write for the Evolution of Horror website, if you want to write reviews or think pieces or essays, then simply email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, with your ideas, and we may be able to get your written pieces published on the website. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Acast, Podbean, Stitcher, Libsyn, various others. If you get a chance, please do subscribe to us. Please do tell your friends and family about us. Spread the word, spread the love. And if you haven't done so already, I'd be so grateful if you could spare a couple of minutes to leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps the podcast get boosted in algorithms and all of that kind of nonsense, and that helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, that's it for this week, but we'll be back next week to begin our journey of deep dives. And next week's a fascinating one because actually all we're going to be reviewing is a 4-minute film. Next week, we are going to be going back earlier than we've ever gone before on the Evolution of Horror. We are going to be discussing a film called The Manor of the Devil from 1896. Now, The Manor of the Devil is made by brilliant film pioneer George Méliès, and he is a hugely important figure in the history of cinema. And it's arguable that The Manor of the Devil is not only the first ever occult movie, but the first ever horror movie. So I've been wanting to cover this for a very long time, and this seemed like the perfect chance to do it. Now, as this movie is only 4 minutes long, as with most George Méliès movies, you can actually find them all on YouTube. So I would check out some of the early horror and gothic stuff that George Méliès did. You can find them all on YouTube, and they're really, really fascinating. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant John Spira, who is a filmmaker and film historian, and he's going to be telling me all about George Méliès and what he contributed to horror and to cinema in general. Then in the second half of the episode, I'm going to be joined by one of my very favourite people, Mary Wilde, who is going to be giving me her Freudian perspective on occult in cinema. And not only that, she's going to be joined by her Projections podcast co-host, Sarah Cleaver. So I got to sit down and chat to the pair of those guys together to talk about all things occult. Thank you so much for listening. Hail Satan, and join us again next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.